The stagecoach lurched violently as the horses reared in panic. Sarah Mitchell clutched the worn leather seat, her knuckles white against her woolen gloves. Outside, the wind howled with vengeful fury across the northern Arizona mountains, driving snow in horizontal sheets that rendered the world beyond the window an impenetrable white void. "Hold tight, miss!" The driver's voice barely carried over the storm. The coach tilted precariously, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the sheer drop mere feet from the wheels. The mountain trail to Flagstaff had been treacherous from the start, but when the snowstorm descended without warning, what had been merely dangerous became lethal. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple, exchanged terrified glances as the coach slid sideways. A sickening crack split the air. The axle. Sarah's stomach lurched as the stagecoach tipped, then tumbled. Her world dissolved into chaos. Splintering wood, screaming passengers, the horrifying sensation of falling. Her head struck something hard, and darkness swallowed her. When consciousness returned, it came with the metallic taste of blood in her mouth and a throbbing pain at her temple. Sarah blinked, disoriented. Snow fell through a gaping hole where the coach roof had been. With trembling hands, she touched her forehead, wincing at the sticky wetness there. "Hello?" Her voice sounded feeble against the wind's mournful wail. "Is anyone there?" The coach lay on its side, half buried in snow. The elderly woman lay motionless nearby, her husband bent over her still form, weeping softly. The salesman was nowhere to be seen. With effort, Sarah pulled herself upright, gasping at the pain that lanced through her ribs. "The driver," she whispered. "We need to find the driver." But when she managed to climb through the broken window, the scene outside stole her breath. The horses were gone, likely broken free in panic. The driver lay crumpled against a boulder, his neck bent at an impossible angle. Beyond him, there was only wilderness, endless white-blanketed pines, and the sheer face of the mountain rising above them. They were stranded in Apache territory. The knowledge settled in her stomach like ice. Fort Whipple, where Lieutenant James Crawford, her fiancé of 6 months, awaited her arrival, lay at least 2 days' journey ahead. Behind them, the mining town they'd departed that morning was equally distant. Sarah had grown up on stories of Apache raids, tales of merciless warriors who swept down from mountain strongholds to attack settlers and soldiers alike. Even as a child in Boston, the name had inspired terror. Now at 22, she stood in the heart of their domain with night approaching and a storm raging. "We need shelter," the old man said, his voice cracking with grief. "My Martha, she's gone. But the rest of us—" Sarah nodded, forcing down her panic. Her father hadn't raised a daughter who would surrender to fear. "We'll gather what supplies remain. There must be a cave or outcropping nearby." As if in answer to her words, the wind parted the curtain of snow momentarily, revealing dark shapes emerging from the trees. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. 7 riders on horseback approached, their faces stoic beneath fur-lined hoods. The Apache had found them. The warriors surrounded the wreckage with practiced efficiency. Their leader dismounted in a fluid motion, his tall frame imposing even at a distance. Unlike the others, he wore no hood, only a band that kept his long black hair from his face. Snow gathered on his shoulders and in his hair, but he seemed impervious to the cold. Sarah stepped forward on trembling legs, positioning herself between the approaching warrior and the old man. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, meeting the man's obsidian gaze directly. "Please," she said. "We mean no harm. Our coach crashed in the storm." The Apache leader studied her with piercing intensity. His face was a striking composition of sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. When he spoke, his English carried only the faintest accent. "You trespass on sacred land." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You speak English." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "I speak many tongues. None change the fact that you are where you should not be." "We didn't choose to crash here," Sarah countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "We were on our way to Fort Whipple." At the mention of the fort, the other warriors tensed visibly. Their leader's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes, a hardening, a darkening. "The soldier fort." He spoke the words like a curse. "You go to join the bluecoats who murder our children and steal our lands." Sarah's throat tightened. My fiancé is stationed there. Lieutenant James Crawford. I'm to be married." The Apache leader took a step closer. Snow swirled between them, dancing in the space that separated their worlds. He was close enough now that Sarah could see the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a pale line against his bronze skin. "What is your name, woman with hair like fire?" The question caught her off guard. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "I am Kave." The name didn't sound Apache to Sarah's ears, but she dared not question it. Instead, she gestured to the wreckage. "There are injured people here. An old man. The driver is dead. Please, if you could help us reach the fort." "No." The word fell between them, final as a stone dropped into still water. "The mountain passes ahead are closed with snow. The valley trail belongs to soldiers who shoot any of my people on sight." His dark eyes held hers. "You will come with us." It wasn't a request. Sarah felt fear climb her spine, but she stood her ground. "And if we refuse?" Kave's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his gaze, a grudging respect, perhaps. "Then you die here, woman with hair like fire. The storm comes again, stronger now. Even your soldiers would tell you this truth." As if to punctuate his words, the wind rose to a howl, driving needles of ice against Sarah's face. She glanced back at the old man, who nodded faintly, resignation in his rheumy eyes. "Very well," she said, turning back to Kave. "We accept your hospitality." For the first time, something like amusement touched the Apache leader's lips. Not quite a smile, but a subtle softening. "You have strange words for a prisoner, Sarah Mitchell." "I'm not your prisoner," she replied, even as one of the warriors approached with rope. "I'm making a choice to survive." Kave watched as his men bound her wrists. Many prisoners believe they have choices. He turned away, issuing commands in Apache to his warriors. Two lifted the old man onto a horse while another collected what meager supplies had survived the crash. When Kave returned to her side, he carried a fur-lined cloak. Without speaking, he draped it over her shoulders, his fingers briefly brushing against her neck. Even through her shock and fear, Sarah felt a jolt at the contact, like lightning contained in human touch. "You ride with me," he said, his voice lower now. "The journey is not long, but the cold bites deep." Before she could protest, he lifted her onto his horse and mounted behind her. His chest pressed against her back, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. Warmth radiated from him, seeping through her damp clothing. "My camp lies beyond the ridge," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "There you will wait until the mountain paths clear." "And then?" Sarah asked, acutely aware of his proximity. Kave didn't immediately answer. When he did, his voice carried a weight she couldn't decipher. "Then we will see what path the Great Spirit chooses for you, Sarah Mitchell." As they rode into the swirling snow, Sarah felt the future she had carefully planned slipping away with each hoofbeat. Fort Whipple, Lieutenant Crawford, the life of a soldier's wife, all faded into the white distance behind them. Ahead lay only uncertainty and the steady rhythm of Kave's heartbeat against her back. What she couldn't have known then, as the snow erased their tracks, was that the path forward would forever change them both. The Apache winter camp nestled in a hidden valley, protected from the brutal mountain winds by towering cliffs. As they descended the narrow trail, Sarah counted nearly 30 dwellings, a mixture of traditional wickiups and more permanent wooden structures. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns against the darkening sky, and children paused in their play to stare at the approaching riders. Kave's arms remained steady around her, his body a shield against the cold. Despite her fear, Sarah found herself leaning into his warmth, her exhaustion finally overwhelming her pride. "You tremble," he observed, his voice rumbling against her back. "I'm cold," Sarah replied, though the truth was more complex. Fear, uncertainty, and the lingering shock of the crash tangled inside her like brambles. When they reached the center of the camp, Kave dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help her down. His hands spanned her waist, and for a moment he held her suspended above the ground, their eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of recognition neither could explain. He set her on her feet and stepped back, severing the connection. "Nizoni will tend to your wound," he said, gesturing to a woman who approached. "The old man will be cared for in the healing lodge." "Thank you," Sarah said, touching the dried blood at her temple. But I would prefer to stay with him. He's lost his wife today. Kave studied her for a long moment. You care for a stranger's grief when your own path is uncertain? Compassion isn't a luxury, Mr. Kave. It's a necessity. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Just Kave. And you speak like the missionaries who raised me. This revelation surprised her. You were raised by missionaries? His expression closed like a door slammed shut. That is a story for another time. Go with Nijoni now. The old man will join you after he is treated. Sarah wanted to press further, but Kave had already turned away, issuing orders to his men. Nijoni, a woman perhaps a few years older than Sarah, approached with cautious dignity. Her dark eyes held neither hostility nor welcome, only careful observation. Come, she said in accented English, you are cold and hurt. Nijoni led Sarah to a small but sturdy cabin at the edge of the camp. Inside, a fire burned in a stone hearth, filling the single room with warmth and the scent of cedar. Furs covered the packed earth floor, and a wooden frame with a deerskin mattress stood in one corner. This was my brother's dwelling, Nijoni explained as she gestured for Sarah to sit by the fire. He died last summer. Soldiers shot him when he hunted in the valley. Sarah flinched at the matter-of-fact tone. I'm sorry. Nijoni dipped a cloth in warm water and began cleaning the wound at Sarah's temple. Your sorrow changes nothing, just as your blue-coat fiancé changes nothing. You know about that? Kave told me while you were being brought from the horses. Nijoni's touch was gentle despite her words. He says you have courage. I think perhaps you have foolishness instead. Sarah stiffened. Is it foolish to speak the truth? It is foolish to defy Kave. Nijoni applied a pungent salve to the cut. He is not like other men. Even among our people he walks alone. Because he was raised by missionaries. Nijoni's hands paused momentarily. That is part of his story, yes, but not all. She bound Sarah's head with a strip of clean cloth. He returned to us 10 winters ago, speaking the white man's tongue but carrying the heart of an Apache. Now he leads because he understands both worlds and trusts neither. Sarah absorbed this information silently. The Kave who had looked at her with such intensity suddenly seemed more complex, a man caught between worlds, much as she now found herself. Rest now, Nijoni said, rising. Food will come soon. The storm will hold us here for many days. After Nijoni left, Sarah removed her damp outer garments and wrapped herself in one of the furs. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She thought of Lieutenant Crawford waiting at Fort Whipple, probably growing concerned at her delay. What would he do when the stagecoach failed to arrive? Would he send a search party? The thought brought little comfort. In this weather, no search would venture into Apache territory. The door opened, startling her from her thoughts. Kave entered carrying a steaming wooden bowl. He had removed his riding clothes and now wore buckskin leggings and a loose cotton shirt, partially open at the chest. A silver medallion hung from a leather cord around his neck. You should eat, he said, offering the bowl. Elk stew, it will warm you. Sarah accepted it cautiously. Thank you. Kave remained standing, watching as she took a tentative sip. The stew was rich and flavorful, warming her from within. Your companion will live? He said after a moment. The old one. His grief is deep, but his body is stronger than it appears. His name is Mr. Holbrook, Sarah said. Thomas Holbrook. They were traveling to join their son in California. Kave nodded once. Names are important. They carry power. He moved to the fire, adding another log. The flames illuminated the sharp planes of his face, casting half in shadow. Why do you journey to marry a soldier, Sarah Mitchell? The question caught her off guard. Lieutenant Crawford is a good man. We met in Boston last year, at my father's shipping office. That is not an answer to my question. Sarah set the bowl aside, suddenly defensive. I don't see how my reasons concern you. Everything within my territory concerns me. Kave's voice remained level, but his eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. Especially a woman who challenges me without fear when most men would tremble. Perhaps I hide my fear better than most. This drew something close to a smile from him. Perhaps. He studied her for a long moment. Your wound heals well? Yes. Your... Nijoni was very skilled. She is my cousin. Kave moved toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow, if you wish, you may walk in the camp, under guard. But I would not have you caged like an animal. The consideration surprised her. That's how generous. Kave's expression darkened slightly. When I was 9 winters old, the missionaries kept me in a small room for speaking my native tongue. I know the pain of walls. His hand rested on the door. We are not the savages your army claims, Sarah Mitchell. I never said you were. Your eyes said it when we first met. His gaze held hers. Now they say something different. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her confusion and the lingering warmth where his eyes had touched hers. The following days established a cautious rhythm. Each morning, an Apache woman named Talasi brought Sarah fresh clothing, simple dresses made of soft-tanned deer hide, and took her soiled garments for washing. Mr. Holbrook stayed in the healing lodge, his health improving slowly as his grief remained a constant companion. True to Kave's word, Sarah was permitted to move about the camp, always with Nijoni or another woman accompanying her. What she observed challenged everything she had been told about the Apache. Children played in the snow, their laughter universal in any language. Women worked at tanning hides, cooking and crafting intricate beadwork. Men repaired weapons, trained horses, and brought game from hunting expeditions. It was a community, not the band of merciless raiders described in newspaper accounts. On her 4th day in the camp, Sarah encountered Kave outside the council lodge. He stood with several other warriors, deep in conversation, but his attention shifted immediately when she appeared. Excusing himself, he approached her, his expression unreadable as always. "The confinement does not sit well with you," he observed. Sarah shook her head. "Actually, I was just thinking how wrong my perceptions had been. Your people live much like any community I've known." Something like satisfaction flickered across his features. "Walk with me," he said, gesturing toward a path that led away from the main camp. Nijoni, who had been accompanying Sarah, exchanged a glance with Kave, then discreetly withdrew. Sarah fell into step beside him, acutely aware of the curious eyes that followed them. "Your presence causes talk," Kave said as they walked. "I imagine it does. A white woman in your camp is hardly usual." "It is not your whiteness that causes the talk." His voice carried a hint of amusement. "It is that I, who have sworn never to bend to the white man's world, spend time with you." Sarah glanced at him. "And why do you?" Kave did not answer immediately. They had reached a small clearing where a frozen stream cut through the valley. Snow-laden pines surrounded them, creating a sanctuary of silence. "When I was taken by the missionaries," he finally said, "I was taught that everything about my people was savage. Our language, our beliefs, our ways." His eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "For years I believed them. I spoke their words, read their books, prayed to their God. What changed? I saw a soldier shoot an Apache woman who begged for food." His voice remained steady, but Sarah saw his jaw tighten. She knelt before him, arms extended with her infant on her back. He shot her through the heart, then reported he had killed a hostile. Horror washed through Sarah. "That's monstrous. That is the world your people brought to mine." Kave turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "That day I knew I must return to my people, even though the missionaries had tried to erase the Apache from my soul." "Not all white men are like that soldier," Sarah said softly. "No, but enough are." He bent down and picked up a smooth stone from the edge of the frozen stream. "You asked why I spend time with you. Perhaps it is because when you look at me, you see a man, not a savage. That is unusual." The admission hung between them, unexpectedly vulnerable from a man who seemed carved from stone. Sarah found herself wanting to reach out to him, to bridge the chasm between their worlds with a simple touch. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. Kave noticed immediately. "You are cold, we should return." As they walked back toward the camp, a commotion ahead caught their attention. A group of warriors rode in, their horses lathered despite the cold. At their center, a man slumped forward, blood staining the snow beneath his mount. Kave broke into a run, Sarah following behind. The injured man was helped from his horse, his face contorted in pain. Even through the dirt and blood, Sarah recognized him, the salesman from the stagecoach. "What happened?" Kave demanded as the warriors lowered the man to the ground. "Soldiers," one replied in Apache, which Sarah couldn't understand. "Patrol from the fort. They shot him thinking he was one of us, then left him for dead," when they saw he was white. Kave knelt beside the wounded man, examining the bullet wound in his shoulder. "Take him to the healing lodge," he ordered, then turned to Sarah. "Your soldiers are searching. They shot this man, your fellow passenger, mistaking him for Apache." Sarah's blood ran cold. "They wouldn't deliberately—" "They did." Kave's voice was sharp as flint, "just as they have done countless times before." He stood, snow clinging to his buckskins. "This changes things. If they are searching these mountains, they may find our camp." "Would that be so terrible?" Sarah asked. "Perhaps they could negotiate." "There is no negotiation with those who see us only as obstacles to be removed." Kave's expression hardened. "We will move camp at dawn, deeper into the mountains where the soldiers will not follow." "And what about me? And Mr. Holbrook? And now this man?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Kave's face. "You cannot travel to the fort while soldiers patrol with trigger-ready fingers, nor can you remain here alone. So we come with you." "Yes." His eyes locked with hers. "Until I can find a safe passage for you." That night, as Sarah prepared for sleep, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Kave, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. "The wounded man asks for you," he said. "He is feverish but conscious." Sarah grabbed her borrowed shawl and followed him to the healing lodge. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs. The salesman lay on a pallet, his face waxy in the firelight. "Mr. Holbrook sat nearby, his weathered face lined with concern. "Miss Mitchell," the salesman whispered when he saw her. "Thank heavens you're alive." Sarah knelt beside him. "Save your strength, Mr. Pearson. William Pearson." He clutched her hand with surprising strength. "Listen to me. The soldiers, they're not just searching. They're planning to burn out any Apache camps they find. Orders from the new commander at Fort Whipple." Sarah felt Kave stiffen beside her. "What new commander?" she asked. "Your fiancé," Pearson replied, his voice fading. "Lieutenant Crawford has been promoted to captain after the previous commander fell ill. His first order was to clear the territory of hostiles before spring." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah. Her James, had ordered what amounted to a massacre. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "No mistake," Pearson's eyes fluttered. "I heard him myself when I reached the fort after the crash. I was trying to return to warn the camp when the patrol found me." Sarah turned to Kave, expecting anger, but his face showed only a terrible resignation. "You see now," he said quietly, "why there can be no peace while your people see mine as less than human." As the full weight of Pearson's revelations settled on her, Sarah felt something fundamental shift within her, a certainty she had carried all her life, suddenly uncertain. James Crawford had always seemed so principled, so honorable. The man who had courted her in Boston, who had written her poetry and spoken of a future filled with dignity and respect, could not be the same man who ordered the destruction of innocent families. Yet the evidence lay before her in Pearson's wounded body. "I didn't know," she whispered, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Kave's hand touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of understanding that nearly broke her composure. "Now you do," he said simply. As they left the healing lodge, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, as if the storm had spent its fury. Kave walked Sarah back to her cabin in silence. At her door he paused. "We leave at first light," he said. "Pack what little you have." Sarah nodded, unable to meet his eyes. As he turned to go, she found her voice again. "Kave." He stopped, looking back at her over his shoulder. "Thank you for showing me the truth even when it hurts." Something softened in his expression, a vulnerability quickly masked. "Truth is like the mountain, Sarah Mitchell. It stands whether we acknowledge it or not." Long after he had gone, Sarah sat by her fire, watching the flames dance and wondering how it was possible to feel so lost, and yet, for the first time in her life, like she might be finding her true path. Dawn broke with the sound of the camp dismantling around her. Sarah had slept little, torn between grief for the life she had imagined and growing clarity about the reality she now faced. She packed her few belongings, her original traveling clothes, now clean and mended, and the small locket containing her parents' miniature portraits. When she emerged from the cabin, the camp was in efficient motion. Women loaded travois with supplies, while men gathered the horses. Children carried what they could, solemn-faced but unafraid. They had done this before, Sarah realized, fled from soldiers, abandoned homes, started anew. Nijoni approached, leading a dappled mare. "You will ride this one," she said. "Kave says you sit a horse well." "He noticed that?" Sarah asked, surprised. A knowing look crossed Nijoni's face. "Kave notices everything about you, Sarah Mitchell." She helped secure Sarah's small bundle to the saddle. "The old man and the wounded one will travel in the medicine wagon. It will be slow but safer than leaving them." Sarah glanced toward the large wagon where Mr. Holbrook was helping settle Pearson on a bed of furs. "That's very generous, considering they are white?" Nijoni's expression remained neutral. "We are not the savages your books claim. Life is sacred, even the lives of those who would take ours." Before Sarah could respond, Kave appeared, mounted on his black stallion. Unlike the previous days, he now wore traditional Apache dress, buckskin leggings decorated with intricate beadwork, a knife at his belt, and a single eagle feather tied in his long hair. War paint streaked his face, red and black lines that emphasized the sharp angles of his cheekbones and jaw. He looked every inch the warrior. Yet when his eyes met Sarah's, she saw the same man who had spoken to her so openly by the frozen stream. "We ride northwest," he announced. "The soldiers will expect us to move deeper into the mountains, but we go to the canyon lands where the horses cannot follow easily." Sarah mounted her mare, adjusting her borrowed dress over her legs. "How far?" "3 days, if the weather holds." Kave's eyes scanned the breaking camp with practiced efficiency. "Stay close to Nijoni. If there is trouble—" He hesitated. "If there is trouble, you ride hard and don't look back." "I won't abandon these people," Sarah replied firmly. "Not after what I've learned." Something like admiration flickered in Kave's eyes. "Your loyalty changes quickly, Sarah Mitchell." "Not my loyalty, my understanding." He nodded once, then raised his arm. The camp moved as one, a silent exodus from the valley that had sheltered them. Sarah fell in beside Nijoni, the medicine wagon rumbling behind them. Kave rode at the head of the column, occasionally dropping back to check on their progress or confer with his scouts. The day passed in the rhythm of hoofbeats against snow. They traveled through forests of pine and across open meadows, always alert, always watchful. By midday, the snow had stopped, and weak winter sunshine glinted off the white landscape. Sarah found herself studying the Apache people with new eyes, noting the quiet dignity with which they faced displacement, the care they showed for the elderly and children, the absence of complaint despite the hardship. These were not the bloodthirsty savages of dime novels and newspaper accounts. They were a people fighting to survive. As dusk approached, Kave called a halt in a sheltered ravine. Camp was established with practiced efficiency, temporary shelters erected, fires built, food prepared. Sarah helped where she could, grateful when the others accepted her assistance without suspicion. After checking on Mr. Holbrook and Pearson, whose fever had broken during the journey, Sarah found herself drawn to the edge of camp, where Kave stood alone, gazing westward toward the setting sun. "Your people move with remarkable skill," she said, coming to stand beside him. "We have had much practice." His voice carried a bitterness she hadn't heard before. "Each season, the territory where we may live grows smaller. Each year, more of my people die or surrender to the reservations." "The reservations? Are they truly so terrible?" Kave turned to her, his war paint still stark against his skin in the fading light. "Have you seen a wild eagle in a cage, Sarah? How it beats its wings until they bleed. How its eyes grow dull with captivity." He looked away. "That is what the reservation does to a people born to freedom." Sarah's chest tightened with empathy. "I'm beginning to understand." "Are you?" He faced her fully now. "Then understand this. I will die before I let my people be imprisoned. I will fight your soldiers, even your fiancé, if that is what it takes." The mention of James sent a pang through Sarah's heart, not of loyalty but of disillusionment. "After what I've learned, I don't believe he is still my fiancé." Kave studied her face intently. "Words are easily spoken. Then I will prove it with actions." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I won't return to Fort Whipple. Not to a man who would order the death of innocent women and children." For a long moment, Kave was silent, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. "You are an unusual woman, Sarah Mitchell." "So I've been told." She smiled faintly, though usually not as a compliment. A hint of answering warmth touched his lips. "Rest now. Tomorrow's journey will be harder. As predicted, the second day of travel brought greater challenges. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through narrow passes. By midday, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising more snow. Kave called for a brief rest in a small clearing. Sarah sat on a fallen log, massaging her aching calves, when a commotion arose from the scouts ahead. Kave conferred with them briefly, his expression darkening, then returned to the main group. "Soldiers," he announced grimly. "A patrol following our trail. 8 men with rifles." Murmurs rippled through the Apache. A woman clutched her child closer to her breast. "How far?" one of the warriors asked. "Less than an hour behind us." Kave's eyes scanned the group, calculating. "We cannot outrun them with the wagon and children." "Then we fight," another warrior said, reaching for his weapon. "No," Kave's voice cut through the tension. "They do not yet know our numbers. We will split." He pointed to several warriors. "You 5, take the women, children, and elders. Continue to the canyon lands. The rest will stay with me and lay a false trail eastward." "A diversion," Sarah realized aloud. Kave turned to her. "Yes, the soldiers will follow what appears to be the main group while our people reach safety." "It's dangerous," she said, concern evident in her voice. "War is dangerous." He gestured to Nijoni. "You will go with the main group, the old man and Pearson as well." Sarah shook her head. "I'll stay with you." Surprise flickered across Kave's face. "Why?" "Because if the soldiers catch up to you, I may be able to help." She straightened her shoulders. "Captain Crawford was my fiancé. They know me. Perhaps I can distract them, buy you time." Kave's warriors exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with her offer. Kave himself studied her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You would risk yourself for Apache lives?" he asked quietly. "I would risk myself for what's right." After a long moment, Kave nodded. "Very well, but you will do exactly as I say, without question." The camp divided quickly, the main group continuing northwest while Kave, Sarah, and 7 warriors prepared to lay the false trail. Before they departed, Nijoni embraced Sarah. "You have a warrior's heart," she whispered. "May it guide you safely back to us." Sarah watched as the main group disappeared into the trees, then turned to find Kave waiting for her. He had removed his war paint and changed into simpler clothing, deliberately making himself less recognizable as a leader. "We ride east," he said, making an obvious trail. "When night falls, we will circle back and rejoin our people." For hours they traveled eastward, deliberately leaving signs of passage that even untrained soldiers could follow. Broken branches, disturbed snow, even remnants of food. As dusk approached, they made camp in a conspicuous clearing, building a fire larger than necessary. "Now we wait," Kave said as they gathered around the flames. "The soldiers will see our fire. They will either attack in the night or wait until dawn." Sarah huddled closer to the heat, shivering despite the fur cloak Kave had given her. "And if they attack? Then we disappear into the darkness while they charge an empty camp." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It is an old trick, but effective." Night descended, wrapping the mountains in velvet darkness. The warriors took turns keeping watch while others rested. Sarah found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of James, of the Apache, of the man who sat beside her now, Kave, whose very presence seemed to pull her like gravity. "You should rest," he said softly, noticing her restlessness. Sarah shook her head. "I can't. Too much has happened." Kave studied her face in the firelight. "You think of your soldier. I think of many things." She drew the cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Of how quickly life can change. A week ago I was traveling to marry a man I thought I knew. Now you sit with his enemy, helping him escape." There was no judgment in Kave's tone, only a quiet understanding. Sarah met his gaze. "Are you my enemy, Kave?" The question hung between them, charged with meanings neither was ready to voice. Before he could answer, one of the warriors approached silently, whispering in Apache. Kave tensed, immediately alert. "Soldiers," he translated for Sarah. Moving through the trees to the south, they approached cautiously. He issued swift commands and the warriors began dousing the fire, leaving only enough flames to maintain the illusion of an occupied camp. Kave took Sarah's arm, guiding her to the edge of the clearing where the horses waited, already saddled. "When I give the signal, mount and follow closely," he whispered. "Make no sound." Sarah nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the trees, she could make out the faint glow of lanterns, the approaching patrol. Kave positioned himself beside her, one hand on his knife, the other gripping her wrist. His touch anchored her, keeping panic at bay. The soldiers drew closer, their whispered commands carrying in the still night air. Sarah recognized a voice with a jolt of shock. James. Captain Crawford himself led the patrol. "I want the Apache leader alive if possible." James's voice drifted through the darkness. "The others are expendable, and keep an eye out for a white woman, blonde, blue-eyed. She may be a hostage." Sarah's breath caught. Beside her, Kave's grip tightened briefly, then relaxed. "On my signal," he breathed, so quietly she barely heard him. 3, 2. A shout from the soldiers' direction shattered the silence. "Camp ahead! Prepare to fire!" "Now!" Kave pulled Sarah toward the horses. Chaos erupted behind them. Rifles discharged, their muzzle flashes illuminating the night in strobing bursts. The Apache warriors melted into the forest like shadows while the soldiers charged the abandoned camp. Sarah swung into her saddle, adrenaline making her movements swift and sure. Kave mounted beside her, then whistled softly, a signal to the others. They rode hard through the darkness, away from the sounds of confusion as the soldiers realized they'd been deceived. For nearly an hour they rode in silence, the only sounds the labored breathing of their horses and the crunch of snow beneath hooves. Kave led them through a maze of narrow passages and dense forest that would be nearly impossible to follow. Finally, he called a halt in a small rock-sheltered hollow. The warriors dismounted, tending to the horses while catching their breath. "They will not find our trail before dawn," Kave said, helping Sarah from her saddle. "And by then, the snow will cover our tracks." Sarah's legs trembled from the hard ride. When she stumbled, Kave caught her arm, steadying her. In the silvery moonlight that filtered through the trees, his face seemed carved from shadow and light, all sharp planes and hidden depths. "I heard James," she said quietly. "He called me a hostage. It is easier for him to believe that than to accept you might choose another path." Kave released her arm slowly. "Perhaps it is even true. Perhaps you are my hostage, Sarah Mitchell." There was something in his voice, a question beneath the statement. Sarah found herself drawn closer to him, as if invisible threads pulled them together. "Is that what I am to you? A hostage?" Kave's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You know it is not." The admission changed something between them, a barrier falling away, leaving only the raw truth of what had been building since their first meeting. When Kave's hand rose to touch her cheek, Sarah didn't pull away. His fingers were warm against her skin, gentle despite their strength. "From the moment I saw you standing in the snow," he said, his voice low and intense, "defying me with fire in your eyes, you have been more than a captive. You have been—" "What?" Sarah whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "A question I cannot answer. A path I never expected." His thumb traced her jawline. "A woman who makes me forget the hatred I have carried." The warriors had discreetly withdrawn, leaving them in a small pocket of privacy. In the silence of the winter night, with danger still threading the darkness around them, Sarah made a choice that would forever change her life's course. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to Kave's. For an instant, he remained still, as if shocked by her boldness. Then his arms encircled her, drawing her against him as he returned her kiss with a passion that stole her breath. His lips were surprisingly soft against hers, his embrace both gentle and fierce, a contradiction that matched everything about him. When they finally parted, Sarah's heart raced not with fear, but with a wild, unfamiliar joy. Kave rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "This changes everything," he murmured. Sarah nodded, words failing her. It did change everything. Her future, her understanding of herself, the boundaries between worlds she had thought impermeable. A low whistle from one of the scouts broke the moment. Kave straightened, instantly alert again. "We must move," he said. "There is a place ahead where we can rest safely until dawn." They rode through the remainder of the night, no longer speaking of what had passed between them, yet everything transformed by it. By the time the eastern sky lightened with the first hint of dawn, they had reached a hidden canyon where the rest of the Apache group awaited. Nijoni rushed forward when they arrived, embracing Sarah with unexpected warmth. "You returned to us. We feared the worst when the scouts reported gunfire." "The soldiers found only shadows," Kave said, dismounting. His eyes sought Sarah's briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The day was spent in cautious rest, the camp remaining vigilant for signs of pursuit. Sarah checked on Mr. Holbrook and Pearson, finding them both improving despite the difficult journey. Pearson, especially, seemed to have undergone a change of heart about the Apache. "They saved my life," he told Sarah as she changed his bandages. "After white soldiers shot me and left me for dead. Makes a man reconsider what he's been taught." By evening, scouts reported that the soldiers had lost their trail completely and appeared to be returning to Fort Whipple. A collective relief swept through the camp, though Kave maintained guards at all times. As twilight settled over the canyon, Sarah found herself drawn to a small rise where Kave stood alone, watching the stars emerge in the deepening blue. "Your plan worked," she said, joining him. "This time." His voice carried a weariness she hadn't heard before. "But they will come again and again, until we are gone from these mountains." Sarah touched his arm gently. "What will you do?" Kave covered her hand with his own. "Continue north, perhaps. There are places in the high country where soldiers rarely venture, places where we might live in peace, at least for a time. And then?" He turned to her fully then, his expression open in a way she had never seen before. "That depends in part on you." Sarah's breath caught. "On me?" "Last night," Kave said carefully, when we... There are some paths, once taken, that change all that follow." "I don't regret it," Sarah said, finding courage in the gathering darkness. "What I regret is how long it took me to see the truth. About James, about your people, about you." Kave took her hands in his. "And what truth do you see about me, Sarah Mitchell?" "I see a man caught between worlds, fighting to protect what he loves. A man of honor in a time when such men are rare." She moved closer, drawn by the same invisible force that had pulled them together the night before. "A man I could love, if given the chance." The vulnerability that flashed across Kave's face made him seem younger, less burdened by the weight he carried. His hands tightened on hers. "Such a path would not be easy," he warned. "You would walk between worlds, belonging fully to neither." "I already do." Sarah smiled softly. "Perhaps that's why I understand you." Kave's response was to draw her into his arms, his embrace a promise more binding than words. Against the backdrop of stars and shadowed mountains, they stood together, two souls who had found each other across the divide of worlds in conflict. Later, as they sat by the central fire with the others, Nijoni observed them with knowing eyes. "The spirits work in strange ways," she murmured to Sarah. "Sometimes what appears to be misfortune is the beginning of a new path." Sarah watched Kave across the flames as he spoke with his warriors, his face animated in the firelight. "Do you think there can be peace between our peoples?" Nijoni considered the question seriously. "Not soon. Perhaps not in our lifetime." She glanced at Sarah. "But every journey begins with a single step. Perhaps you and Kave are that step." The following morning brought clear skies and a decision. The Apache would continue northward to their winter grounds, a hidden valley known only to their people. Mr. Holbrook announced his intention to continue to California when he was strong enough, while Pearson, surprisingly, asked to remain with the Apache until spring. "I've got nowhere pressing to be," he explained to Sarah, "and I owe them my life. Might as well make myself useful for a while." As the camp prepared to move, Kave sought out Sarah. "We leave within the hour," he said. "I must know your choice." Sarah looked toward the south, where Fort Whipple lay beyond the mountains. The life she had planned waited there, a life of supposed civilization, of officers' wives and polite society, a life she now understood was built on the suffering of others. Then she looked at Kave, at the proud people who had shown her kindness despite every reason for hatred, at the world she had discovered that was richer and more true than the one she had left behind. "My choice is made," she said, meeting Kave's gaze steadily. "I stay with you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden and brilliant. He took her hands, pressing them to his heart. "There will be challenges," he warned, even as happiness deepened his voice. "Your world will not easily let you go. My world is where I choose it to be. Sarah stepped closer. And I choose to be here, with you. As the Apache broke camp and continued their journey northward, Sarah rode at Kave's side. No longer a captive, no longer a stranger, but a woman who had found her true path in the most unexpected of places. Behind them, the mountains kept their secrets. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but between them grew something stronger than the prejudices that divided their peoples, a love forged in the wilderness, tempered by truth, and sustained by the courage to defy expectation. And in that love lay the first fragile seed of understanding between two worlds. Spring came to the northern Arizona mountains in a riot of wildflowers and melting snow. The hidden valley that sheltered the Apache through the harsh winter months now basked in sunlight, streams swollen with snowmelt cutting silver paths through meadows of new grass. Sarah stood at the entrance to the wickiup she now shared with Kave, watching as children chased each other through fields of blue lupine and orange paintbrush. 3 months had transformed her in ways she could scarcely have imagined when she first arrived in Apache territory. Her skin had darkened from days spent outdoors, her hands had grown calloused from work, and her heart had found its home in a world she once feared. You smile more now, Nijoni observed, joining her. In the months of winter isolation, the two women had developed a friendship that transcended their different backgrounds. Nijoni had taught Sarah the Apache language, their customs, their ways of survival, while Sarah had shared her knowledge of reading and writing, teaching not only Nijoni, but several of the children as well. I have reasons to smile, Sarah replied, glancing toward where Kave worked with the other men, preparing for the spring hunt. His tall figure was unmistakable among them, his movements confident and fluid. The council meets tonight, Nijoni said, following her gaze. They will decide about moving the camp. Sarah nodded, a flutter of unease stirring in her stomach. The decision had been delayed for weeks, whether to remain in their current location or push further north, away from the increasing encroachment of white settlers and soldiers. Kave had been torn between the safety of distance and the reluctance to abandon ancestral lands. Has he told you which way he will vote? Nijoni asked. No, Sarah sighed. He carries this burden alone, though I've tried to share it. Nijoni touched her arm gently. He protects you. The weight of leadership is heavy, especially when it may determine the survival of a people. As twilight settled over the valley, the council fire was lit in the center of the camp. Women were not traditionally part of these deliberations, but Kave had insisted that Sarah be present, not to speak, but to witness. She sat slightly apart from the circle of men, Nijoni beside her, as the elders and warriors gathered to determine their future. The council chief, an elderly man named Nantai, whose wisdom was revered among all the bands, opened the discussion. We face a choice that has no easy answer, he said, his voice steady despite his years. The soldiers press closer each season. The game grows scarce. Our ancestral lands shrink like water under the summer sun. Warriors spoke in turn, each offering his perspective. Some argued passionately for moving north, where other Apache bands had found relative peace. Others insisted on remaining and fighting for their traditional territories. Kave was the last to speak, and when he rose, the circle fell silent. I have walked in both worlds, he began, his gaze passing over the assembled men before briefly meeting Sarah's. I have seen the strength and the weakness of the white man. I have felt their hate and rarely their compassion. He paused, his expression grave. They will not stop coming. Their hunger for land, for gold, for what we possess is endless. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. But I have also seen this, Kave continued. They are not all the same. Among them are those who recognize injustice, who would stand with us if given the chance. His eyes found Sarah again. Who would choose our way over theirs? The implication was clear to everyone present. Sarah felt the weight of many gazes upon her, some curious, some still suspicious despite the months she had spent among them. I do not counsel surrender, Kave said firmly, nor do I counsel a fight we cannot win. I propose a third path, one that requires courage of a different kind. He outlined his plan to send emissaries to the territorial governor, bypassing the army command at Fort Whipple, to seek formal recognition of their right to remain on a portion of their ancestral lands, to use the increasing newspaper coverage of Indian affairs to their advantage by telling their story to sympathetic journalists. It is a risk, he acknowledged, but one worth taking before we abandon the mountains that have sheltered our people since before memory. Debate continued late into the night. Sarah watched Kave as he responded to questions and challenges with patience and conviction. This was a side of him she had glimpsed before, but never so fully, the leader whose vision extended beyond immediate survival to the future of his people. When the council finally dispersed near midnight, Kave's proposal had been accepted, though not unanimously. They would remain through summer, sending representatives to initiate negotiations, while preparing for the possibility of moving if those efforts failed. Sarah waited for Kave outside their dwelling, her heart full of pride and concern in equal measure. When he finally approached, exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes lightened at the sight of her. "You were magnificent," she said softly, as he took her hands in his. "I was terrified," he admitted, with a rare vulnerability. "The future of many rests on these decisions." Sarah reached up to touch his face. "You gave them hope, a path forward that doesn't surrender dignity or safety." Kave drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were the anchor that kept him steady in uncertain waters. "There is something I must ask you," he said against her hair, "something I have considered for many days." Sarah leaned back to look up at him. "What is it?" "The emissaries to the governor, they will need someone who understands the white man's ways, someone who can speak with authority in their world while representing our interests." His eyes searched hers. "I would ask you to go with them." The request took Sarah by surprise. Since winter, she had fully embraced life in the Apache camp, rarely thinking of the world she had left behind. The prospect of returning, even temporarily, stirred conflicting emotions. "You wish me to leave?" she asked, trying to understand. "I wish you to help," Kave clarified, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "There is no one else who bridges our worlds as you do. No one else the governor might listen to when they speak of Apache concerns." "And if I encounter James?" The question had to be asked. Captain Crawford had not given up easily. Throughout winter, reports had reached them of patrols searching the mountains, though none had ventured as far north as their hidden valley. "That is part of the risk," Kave acknowledged, his jaw tightening. "But you would not be alone. 2 warriors would accompany you, Tarak and Hinto, who speak enough English to manage." Sarah considered the request carefully. The thought of separation from Kave, even temporarily, pained her, yet she understood the importance of the mission. "When would we leave?" "In 2 weeks, when the lower passes are fully clear of snow." Kave's thumbs traced circles on her shoulders. "I would not ask this if there were another way." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know, and I will go." She reached up to touch the silver medallion that hung around his neck, the one he had worn since she first met him. "But I need something from you first." "Anything," he promised without hesitation. "Tell me about this." Her fingers brushed the medallion. "You've never spoken of it, though you never remove it." Kave's expression softened. Taking her hand, he led her inside their dwelling where a small fire still burned. By its light, he lifted the leather cord over his head and placed the medallion in her palm. It was silver, tarnished with age, bearing the image of a woman with flowing hair, surrounded by rays of light. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I have of her. The missionaries allowed me to keep it because it reminded them of their saints, though it came from my father's people, far to the south." "She died when you were taken?" Sarah asked gently. Kave nodded, sitting beside her on the furs that made their bed. "Raiders attacked our camp. My father died defending us. My mother hid me in a crevice among the rocks, then tried to draw them away." His voice remained steady, but Sarah saw the pain that lived behind his eyes. "The missionaries found me 2 days later, still hiding where she had placed me." Sarah closed her hand around the medallion, feeling its weight. "And you've carried her with you all this time?" "It reminds me of who I am," Kave said simply. "When the missionaries tried to erase my past, when the army called me savage, when my own people questioned my loyalty after my return, it reminded me that I am my mother's son, regardless of the world's judgment." The intimacy of the moment, this sharing of a pain so long held private, moved Sarah deeply. She opened her hand, offering the medallion back to him. "Thank you for telling me." Instead of taking it, Kave closed her fingers around it again. "Keep it," he said. "Carry it with you to the governor's city. Let it remind you of who you are now, regardless of how they may see you. Kave, I can't take this from you. You are not taking, he interrupted gently. I am giving. It is our way when... He hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. When a man asks a woman to be his wife. Sarah's breath caught. Though they had lived as partners through the winter, sharing work and bed and heart, they had never spoken of marriage. In the Apache way, their union had been recognized through action rather than ceremony, but Kave knew the importance such formalities held in her former world. Are you asking me to marry you? She whispered, hardly daring to believe. Kave took her face between his hands. I'm asking you to be my wife in all ways, before your world and mine, to build a life between them, however difficult that path may be. Joy rose in Sarah like floodwater, swift and unstoppable. Yes, she said, the word emerging breathless and fierce. Yes, I will be your wife. Their kiss sealed the promise, tender at first, then deepening with the passion that had only grown stronger in their months together. When they finally parted, Kave pressed his forehead to hers in the gesture that had become intimate shorthand for their connection. When you return, he murmured, we will have the ceremony. Both Apache and white, if you wish it. Sarah smiled, happiness bright enough to eclipse her apprehension about the journey ahead. I wish only to be yours, in whatever way cements that truth. Dawn broke clear and cool on the day of departure. Sarah wore a dress made by Nijoni, a careful blend of Apache design and white styling that would allow her to move between worlds without abandoning either. Tarak and Hinto, the warriors who would accompany her, had similarly modified their appearance, though they still carried traditional weapons alongside the rifles they had acquired through trade. The camp gathered to see them off, offering gifts and wishes for safe return. Mr. Holbrook, who had remained with them through winter due to his age and the difficult travel conditions, had decided to journey with Sarah's party to the territorial capital, from where he could finally continue to California. You've changed my understanding of the world, Miss Mitchell, he told her as they prepared to depart. Or should I say, Mrs. Kave? Sarah smiled at the name, though it wasn't quite accurate in either culture. Just Sarah, please. And you've changed too, Mr. Holbrook. The old man nodded, glancing toward where Pearson stood with a group of Apache men. True to his word, Pearson had made himself useful during the winter months, teaching carpentry skills and learning hunting techniques in return. He had decided to remain with the Apache indefinitely, finding a peace among them that had eluded him in white society. Funny how life takes unexpected turns, Holbrook mused. A stagecoach accident that should have killed us instead gave us new lives. When the time came for final goodbyes, Kave walked with Sarah to the edge of the camp where horses waited. Their parting was private, despite the many eyes upon them. 3 weeks, Sarah said, touching the medallion that now hung around her neck. I'll be back before the summer solstice. Kave nodded, his hands warm on her waist. Be cautious in the white man's city. There are those who would not understand your choice. I'll be careful. She kissed him once more, memorizing the feel of him. And successful, I'll help them understand that peace is possible. If anyone can bridge these worlds, it is you, my heart. Kave lifted her onto her horse with strong, sure hands. Return to me. Always, she promised. The small party rode out of the valley as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Sarah did not look back until they reached the ridge that would take them out of sight. When she turned, Kave still stood where she had left him, a solitary figure watching her departure. She raised her hand in farewell, the medallion catching the morning light against her chest, then urged her horse forward into the uncertain path ahead. The territorial capital bustled with activity that felt foreign to Sarah after months in the wilderness. The noise, the crowds, the rigid formality of dress and manner, all seemed strangely artificial now. She found herself maintaining a careful distance from the society she had once inhabited, without question. Tarak and Hinto established camp outside the town limits, unwilling to subject themselves to the stares and potential hostility of the townspeople. Sarah, presenting herself as the widow of a miner, took a room at a modest boarding house. Her fair coloring and proper speech allowed her to move through white society without suspicion, though she felt increasingly like an imposter among her own race. Securing an appointment with Governor Safford proved more difficult than anticipated. For days, Sarah was rebuffed by clerks and secretaries. It was only when she happened to encounter the governor's wife at a charity function and impressed her with her knowledge of Eastern society that she finally gained entree to the great man himself. "Mrs. Mitchell," Governor Safford greeted her politely, if disinterestedly, when she was finally shown into his office. "My wife speaks highly of you. How may I be of assistance?" Sarah had rehearsed this moment countless times, both with Kave and in her own mind. She chose her words with care. "Thank you for seeing me, Governor. I've come on a matter of some delicacy regarding the Apache situation in the Northern Territories." The governor's expression immediately hardened. "The Apache situation, as you call it, is a military matter, madam. If you have concerns, I suggest you speak with the command at Fort Whipple. That would be problematic, sir." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You see, I bring a proposal directly from Chief Kave of the Tonto Apache. A proposal for peace negotiations that would bypass military channels." Safford's eyebrows rose. "You've had contact with the Apache leader, the same one who has been evading army patrols for the better part of a year?" "I have more than had contact, Governor," Sarah replied steadily. "I have lived among his people since winter. I come as their emissary, with the authority to begin preliminary discussions." The governor's surprise gave way to suspicion. "Why would Kave send a white woman as his representative?" "Because I understand both worlds." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I was traveling to Fort Whipple last winter to marry Captain Crawford when our stagecoach crashed in Apache territory. Chief Kave's people saved my life, and in living among them I discovered that much of what we believe about them is mistaken." She proceeded to outline Kave's proposal: recognition of specific Apache territories in exchange for peace, with provisions for supervised trading posts that would benefit both communities. As she spoke, Safford's expression shifted from dismissal to reluctant interest. "This is highly irregular," he said when she had finished. "The Army would object strenuously to being excluded from such negotiations." "The Army has proven incapable of resolving the situation through force," Sarah countered. "Captain Crawford's policy of pursuing Apache bands regardless of whether they've committed hostile acts has only escalated tensions. Chief Kave offers an alternative that could save lives on both sides." Safford studied her with new intensity. "You speak with remarkable passion for someone who was to marry an army officer. Does Captain Crawford know of your change in circumstances?" "No," Sarah admitted, "though I imagine he has drawn his own conclusions from my absence." "Indeed." The governor rose, moving to the window that overlooked the town square. "What you propose would require significant political courage on my part, Mrs. Mitchell. The settlers demand protection. The army demands freedom to operate, and you ask me to negotiate directly with a people many consider savages. I ask you to recognize their humanity," Sarah said quietly, "to acknowledge that they have rights to the land they have inhabited for generations, to seek peace through understanding rather than submission." Safford turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. "Return tomorrow with your Apache companions. I will hear them speak as well before making my decision." It was more than Sarah had dared hope for. As she left the governor's office, a sense of cautious optimism buoyed her steps. Perhaps change was possible after all. Her optimism was short-lived. As she rounded the corner toward her boarding house, a familiar figure stepped into her path, blocking her way. Captain James Crawford. He had changed in the months since she had last seen him. His face had hardened, lines etching themselves around his mouth and eyes. He wore his captain's uniform with rigid precision, as if the military structure were all that held him together. "Sarah," her name on his lips sounded like an accusation. "So it's true. You live." She forced herself to remain calm, though her heart raced. "Hello, James." "6 months," he said, his voice tightly controlled. "6 months of searching, of wondering if you were dead or worse, and now I find you walking freely in the territorial capital, apparently in good health." "I am well, as you can see." Sarah was acutely aware of the medallion hidden beneath her high collar, Kave's pledge around her neck. "Where have you been?" James demanded, stepping closer. "The search parties found the wreckage, the dead. Pearson disappeared, the old man too, and you vanished." "I was rescued," Sarah said carefully, "by people who showed me kindness when I needed it most." Understanding dawned in James's eyes, followed quickly by disgust. "The Apache, you've been with them all this time." His gaze raked over her, searching for signs of mistreatment or coercion that would explain her presence among enemies. "Were you a prisoner? Did they force you?" "No, James." She met his gaze steadily. "I chose to stay." His face contorted with disbelief. "Chose? To live among savages who raid settlements and murder soldiers? I chose to live among people who have been driven from their lands, whose children are killed, whose way of life is being systematically destroyed." Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. "I've seen both sides now, James. The Apache are not the monsters you believe them to be." James stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. "What happened to you, Sarah? The woman I knew would never defend hostiles against her own kind. The woman you knew didn't understand the truth." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for the pain my disappearance caused you, James. Truly. But I cannot return to the life we planned. Because of them." His voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of passers-by. "Or because of him. The scouts say you're with their leader now. That you've become his—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his face flushing with anger and humiliation. Sarah's hand went instinctively to the medallion beneath her dress. "His wife," she said quietly. "I am to be Kave's wife." James recoiled as if struck. For a moment she thought he might raise his hand against her. Such was the fury in his eyes. Instead, he drew himself up with military rigidity. "You've made your choice, then." His voice had gone cold. "But know this. The territory is not large enough for both your Apache lover and me. One of us will not see the year's end." The threat chilled Sarah to her core. "James, please. There's a chance for peace. I've spoken with the governor." "Peace?" James laughed bitterly. "There will be no peace while a single Apache draws breath in these mountains. I will personally see to that." He stepped aside, his gesture mockingly gallant. "Good day, Miss Mitchell. Our engagement is, of course, at an end." Sarah watched him stride away, his back ramrod straight, his hands clenched at his sides. The encounter left her shaken but more determined than ever. James's threat was not idle. She knew him well enough to recognize the implacable hatred that now drove him. She needed to warn Kave. The meeting with Governor Safford the following day proceeded better than expected. Tarek and Hinto, dignified in their careful blend of traditional and white clothing, presented themselves with quiet confidence. They spoke of their people's desire for peace, their willingness to accommodate some white settlement in exchange for guaranteed hunting grounds, their hope that their children might live without fear. Safford listened with surprising attentiveness, asking questions that revealed a more nuanced understanding of the situation than Sarah had anticipated. By the end of the discussion, he had agreed to draft a preliminary framework for negotiations, a document that would bring Kave and other Apache leaders to a formal peace council within 2 months. It was a victory, however tentative, and Sarah felt a surge of hope as they left the governor's mansion, but her encounter with James cast a shadow over the achievement. "We must return to the camp immediately," she told Tarek and Hinto as they retrieved their horses from the livery stable. "Captain Crawford knows of my connection to Kave. He may already be planning an attack." They rode hard for 3 days, pushing themselves and their mounts to the limits of endurance. Sarah's anxiety grew with each passing mile. She had sent a message to Kave through a trusted trader who traveled between settlements, but there was no way to know if it had reached him. As they approached the hidden valley on the 4th day, Sarah's worst fears were realized. Smoke rose above the tree line, not the controlled cooking fires of the camp, but the thick black plumes of destruction. "No!" The cry tore from her throat as she urged her horse forward, heedless of danger. Tarek and Hinto flanked her, arrows nocked and ready as they crested the final ridge. The scene below stopped Sarah's heart. Half the camp lay in ruins, wickiups and cabins, reduced to smoldering remains. Apache warriors moved through the wreckage, tending to wounded and salvaging what could be saved. There was no sign of soldiers. The attack appeared to be over. They rode down the slope at breakneck speed. As they reached the edge of the camp, Njoni came running toward them, her face streaked with soot but otherwise unharmed. "You return!" she cried, grasping Sarah's hands as she dismounted. "We feared you were lost when the bluecoats came." "Kave?" Sarah managed, her throat tight with fear. "Where is Kave?" Njoni's expression was grim but not despairing. "The healing lodge. He lives, but—" Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She ran through the camp, barely registering the destruction around her, her entire being focused on reaching the large structure that served as their infirmary. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs and the metallic tang of blood. Kave lay on a pallet near the central fire, his chest wrapped in blood-stained bandages. His face was pale beneath its bronze, his breathing shallow. When Sarah fell to her knees beside him, his eyes fluttered open, recognition followed by relief flooding his gaze. "You came back," he whispered, his voice ragged. "Of course I came back." Sarah took his hand, careful not to disturb the bandages. "What happened?" "Crawford." The name was a curse on Kave's lips. "He came with 30 men at dawn. We had warning from the scouts and moved most of the women and children to the high caves, but—" He broke off, pain crossing his features. "Don't speak," Sarah urged, tears blurring her vision. "Save your strength." Kave's grip tightened on her hand. "Listen, this changes everything. The camp is not safe now that they know its location." The medicine woman approached, gently checking Kave's bandages. "The bullet passed through his shoulder," she told Sarah in Apache. "Another grazed his side. He is strong, he will heal." Sarah nodded her thanks, then turned back to Kave. "I have news from the governor. He agreed to negotiations, a formal peace council within 2 months. There's still hope." A shadow crossed Kave's face. "Crawford will never allow it. He will hunt us until one of us falls. Then we must ensure it isn't you." Sarah reached for the medallion around her neck, pressing it into Kave's palm. "Your mother protected you once. Let her strength protect you again." Kave's fingers closed around the silver disc. "You still wish to be my wife, even now with everything in ruins?" "Now more than ever," Sarah replied without hesitation. Over the next week, the camp slowly recovered from the attack. 5 Apache had been killed, 3 warriors, an elder and a child caught in the crossfire. The dead were mourned in a solemn ceremony that Sarah attended as Kave's chosen wife, standing tall despite the suspicious glances from those who blamed her for bringing the soldiers to their door. Kave's wounds healed with remarkable speed, though he would carry new scars alongside the old. The council met again, this time unanimously agreeing to relocate deeper into the mountains while maintaining communication with the governor through trusted intermediaries. As the camp prepared for the journey, Pearson approached Sarah one evening as she collected water from the stream. "I'm leaving," he announced without preamble. Sarah straightened, surprised. "Leaving? Where will you go?" "Fort Whipple." At her alarmed expression, he raised a hand, not to join them, to end this. "What do you mean?" Pearson's face was set with determination. "Crawford won't stop. You know that. He's a man consumed by pride and jealousy now. But if I testify to what I've seen, both the army's brutality and the Apache's restraint, perhaps others will listen." "It's dangerous," Sarah warned. "He could have you arrested as a traitor." "Some risks are worth taking." Pearson smiled faintly. "I was a different man before the crash, Miss Mitchell. Selfish, small-minded. These people changed that. I owe them a debt I can never fully repay. But this is a start." 2 days later, Pearson departed with the blessing of the council and Kave's grudging admiration. The Apache began their migration north, a slow procession of families and possessions moving deeper into the wilderness. Kave and Sarah rode at the head of the column, his arm still bound in a sling, but his presence as commanding as ever. "We received word from the territorial capital yesterday," he told her as they navigated a narrow mountain pass. "Governor Safford is standing firm on the Peace Council, despite pressure from the army. He has requested federal observers to ensure fairness." Hope kindled in Sarah's chest. "Then there's still a chance." "A chance," Kave agreed cautiously. "But Crawford remains a threat. His patrol has been spotted to the east, moving parallel to our path." "He won't give up," Sarah said softly. Not until one of us is dead," Kave finished. "I know." They made camp that night in a sheltered box canyon, posting extra guards along the ridgelines. As darkness fell, Sarah sat with Kave beside their private fire, planning their upcoming marriage ceremony. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, they had decided not to wait for safer times. "We will combine both traditions," Kave said, sketching the ceremony in the dirt with a stick. "The Apache binding ritual, and then words from your faith." Sarah leaned against his good shoulder, content despite the danger that lurked beyond their firelight. All that matters is that we face whatever comes together. A commotion at the edge of camp interrupted their peace. Shouts of alarm, followed by the pounding of hooves. Kave was on his feet instantly, knife drawn despite his injury. Sarah rose beside him, her hand on the small pistol she had begun carrying since the attack. A lone rider galloped into the circle of fires, his horse lathered and heaving. With a shock, Sarah recognized Pearson, his face bloodied and his clothing torn. "Crawford," he gasped as warriors helped him from his saddle. "Coming now. 30 men. They know your location." Kave issued swift commands, mobilizing the camp for immediate evacuation. "How?" he demanded of Pearson. "How did they find us?" "Tortured a trader who had seen your party moving north," Pearson replied, accepting water from Nijoni. "I escaped to warn you, but they're less than an hour behind me." Sarah met Kave's gaze, seeing her own determination reflected there. "We can't keep running," she said. "Not forever." "No," he agreed grimly. "We cannot." In the flurry of activity that followed, a plan formed, not of retreat, but of confrontation on their own terms. The women, children, and elders would continue north with most of the supplies, while Kave and his warriors would remain to face Crawford's patrol. "I'm staying with you," Sarah insisted, when Kave tried to send her with the others. "This is not your fight," he argued, though his eyes betrayed his pride in her courage. "It became my fight the moment I chose you," she replied. "Besides, I may be the only one who can speak to James and be heard." Kave studied her face, then nodded once. "Stay close to me. If things go badly, you ride north without looking back." "Nothing will go badly," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Not when we have justice on our side." They prepared their position carefully. A narrow pass where the approaching patrol would be channeled between steep rock walls. Not for ambush, as might have been the traditional Apache tactic, but for parley. Kave would meet Crawford face to face, with the governor's written agreement as evidence of their legitimate standing. "He won't care about papers," Pearson warned as they took their positions. "He's beyond reason where you're concerned." "Then I will make him listen," Sarah said, adjusting her dress, deliberately choosing the one she had worn during her meeting with the governor. Her hair was styled simply but neatly, her appearance a bridge between the worlds she now straddled. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains. The scouts reported Crawford's patrol approaching from the south, moving fast, but not with the stealth of a surprise attack. They knew the Apache were aware of their coming. Kave positioned himself at the center of the pass, Sarah at his side. Behind them, partially concealed among the rocks, waited 20 warriors with rifles and bows. Not enough to defeat 30 soldiers in open combat, but enough to exact a terrible price if violence erupted. "Remember," Kave told his men, "we seek peace first. Blood only if there is no other path." The patrol appeared at the mouth of the pass, just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Captain Crawford rode at their head, his uniform immaculate despite days on the trail. He raised his hand, halting his men when he spotted the waiting Apache. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring between the two groups. Then Crawford urged his horse forward alone, stopping 30 paces from where Kave and Sarah stood. "So," he called, his voice carrying in the morning stillness, "the renegade and his white squaw." Sarah felt Kave tense beside her, but was grateful when he remained silent, allowing her to speak first as they had planned. "Captain Crawford," she addressed him formally, stepping slightly forward. "We meet you under the authority of Governor Safford, who has sanctioned peace negotiations between the territorial government and the Apache Nation." She held up the document bearing the governor's seal. Crawford's eyes narrowed, but he made no move to examine it. "The governor exceeds his authority," he replied coldly. "Military matters fall under army jurisdiction. These hostiles are wanted for attacks on settlements and patrols." "Say false accusations," Kave spoke for the first time, his voice steady. "My people have not raided settlements. We have defended ourselves against unprovoked attacks by your soldiers." Crawford's gaze shifted to him, hatred naked in his eyes. "You stole what was mine." "Sarah Mitchell makes her own choices," Kave replied evenly, "as she chose to broker peace between our peoples, rather than see more bloodshed." A muscle worked in Crawford's jaw. "There will be peace when your kind is either on the reservation or in the ground." Sarah took another step forward, ignoring Kave's warning hand on her arm. James, she said, deliberately using his given name, I know you. You were once an honorable man. This vendetta serves no one. Not the territory, not the army, certainly not you. Something flickered in Crawford's eyes, a moment of the man she had once known, quickly submerged beneath rage and wounded pride. You chose him, he said flatly. A savage over civilization, your own kind. I chose compassion over cruelty, Sarah replied. Understanding over hatred. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, so be it. But the governor believes in the possibility of peace. Will you defy both him and your own humanity for the sake of revenge? Crawford's hand moved to his holster, resting there in silent threat. Behind him, his men tensed, rifles ready. One last chance, Sarah, he said, his voice dropping. Come back with me now, renounce this association, and I'll spare the Apache. They can go north out of the territory. Never return. Sarah felt rather than saw Kave straighten beside her. And if she refuses? He asked, though he clearly knew the answer. Crawford's smile was cold. Then I finish what I started at your camp. Before Sarah could respond, hoofbeats sounded from the southern end of the pass. A rider approached at speed, wearing not the blue of the army but the formal attire of a government official. The soldiers parted to let him through, confusion evident on their faces. The newcomer reined in beside Crawford, his expression severe. Captain Crawford, he announced loudly enough for all to hear, I have orders from Governor Safford. You are relieved of command pending investigation into unauthorized military action against peaceful Indians. Crawford's face contorted with disbelief. On whose authority? On the authority of the territorial government, and with the support of your commanding general, who was most disturbed to learn of your personal vendetta. The official produced a sealed document. Your men are to return to Fort Whipple immediately. You will accompany me to the capital to answer charges. Silence fell over the pass. Crawford's hand still hovered near his weapon, his expression cycling through shock, rage, and finally a terrible resignation. This isn't over, he said, his eyes boring into Sarah's. Not while I draw breath. It is over, Captain, the official stated firmly, unless you wish to add disobeying direct orders to your offenses. For a moment, Sarah feared Crawford might draw his weapon regardless of consequences. But military discipline ingrained through years of service finally asserted itself. With a curt nod, he wheeled his horse and addressed his men. We return to the fort, he announced, his voice brittle with suppressed fury. Now! As the patrol turned and began retreating down the pass, the official approached Kave and Sarah. Chief Kave, he said with formal respect. Miss Mitchell, the governor sends his regards and reaffirms his commitment to the Peace Council. Recent events have only strengthened his resolve to find a just solution. How did you know where to find us? Sarah asked, still stunned by the unexpected intervention. Mr. Pearson, the official replied with a slight smile. He reached the governor before Captain Crawford's supporters could silence him. His testimony, along with your preliminary work, convinced Governor Safford to act decisively. Kave stepped forward, extending his hand in the white man's custom. Your arrival was well-timed. You have our gratitude. The journey toward peace is just beginning, the official cautioned as he shook Kave's hand. There will be resistance from many quarters, but today, at least, bloodshed was averted. As the official departed to escort Crawford's patrol back to civilization, the Apache warriors emerged from their positions, their relief palpable. Kave turned to Sarah, his expression a mixture of wonder and cautious hope. Perhaps there is a path between our worlds after all, he said softly. Sarah smiled up at him, her heart full. There has always been a path. We just needed the courage to walk it. 3 weeks later, on a perfect summer morning, Sarah Mitchell and Kave stood together on a high promontory overlooking their new camp. Below, Apache and white officials mingled cautiously but peacefully, the first day of the formal Peace Council proceeding with measured optimism. Governor Safford himself had journeyed to the neutral ground chosen for the negotiations, bringing representatives from Washington eager to resolve the Apache problem without further military embarrassment. Kave had assembled leaders from several Apache bands, creating a unified front that demanded respect. But this morning belonged not to politics, but to them. Dressed in ceremonial attire that honored both their traditions, Sarah in a white dress adorned with Apache beadwork, Kave in formal buckskins with a white man's silver watch chain, they faced each other as the rising sun gilded the mountains. Nijoni stood nearby holding the woven blanket that would symbolically unite them in the Apache tradition. An elderly missionary who had once taught Kave and who had traveled from the south at Sarah's request, waited to speak the Christian vows that would satisfy her upbringing. "Two worlds," Kave said softly, taking Sarah's hands in his. "One heart." The medallion that had once been his mother's now hung from a beaded chain around Sarah's neck, catching the sunlight like a promise. Around them, members of both cultures gathered to witness their union, a living testament to the possibility of understanding across divides once thought unbridgeable. As the ceremony began, Sarah looked into Kave's eyes and saw their future reflected there. Not easy, perhaps, but rich with purpose and love. The path they had chosen would require continued courage from them both, standing as they did at the fragile intersection of conflicting worlds. But standing there with his hands strong and sure around hers, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in the heart of a man who had claimed her with a single look across the snowy wilderness that had brought them together. "I am yours," she vowed, her voice carrying clear in the mountain air, "in this world and whatever comes after." "And I am yours," Kave replied, the words an oath and a benediction, "until the stars fall from the sky." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the gathering erupted in a blend of Apache ululations and white applause, discordant, yet somehow harmonious, like the union they celebrated. The future remained uncertain. The peace negotiations would face obstacles, old hatreds would not disappear overnight, and somewhere James Crawford nursed his wounded pride and planned his return. But those challenges belonged to tomorrow. Today was for love that had defied boundaries, expectations, and the bitter legacy of mistrust. Today was for hope, embodied in two people who had found in each other the courage to imagine a different world. And as Kave swept Sarah into his arms beneath the endless Arizona sky, that hope seemed not just possible, but inevitable, as unstoppable as the love that had blossomed in the harshest of wildernesses and now flourished, against all odds, under the watchful gaze of two peoples taking their first tentative steps toward understanding. The end. Dear listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this tale of love and courage in the wild Arizona territory. It was crafted to bring warmth and comfort to your heart during our time together. We always hope these storytelling moments provide relaxation and positive feelings for all of you. Thank you for being here and for your continued support. Your presence makes these stories meaningful, and we're grateful for every moment you spend with us. Until our next story, may you be protected and surrounded by peace, with all our affection and respect. Wild West Whispers team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. We truly hope this story has brought warmth to your heart and a sense of calm to your day. Here at Wild West Whispers, we believe in the power of storytelling to heal, uplift, and connect us.